We'll
Let's
see.
jump into things because Brandon Thurston and I did a lengthy show earlier today going through a lot of the major key points of today's big story of the sale going through that Endeavor has acquired WWE and is spinning it off into its own company, separate company from Endeavor that will be housing the WWE and the UFC. It does not have a name yet, although Vince McMahon is putting his head down and will be coming up with something. They are going to be using the on the stock ticker. It will be going by the letters TKO.
Oh yeah.
How do you like that way?
Oh, I love it. Calls back to my favorite Canadian MMA promotion.
That's right. That's right.
In the world.
I don't know if Stefan Patry had any thoughts on this choice of lettering, but that is going to be the new company, and Endeavor will have the controlling shares of 51%, while WWE shareholders will maintain 49%, with Endeavor holding 6 seats on their board of governors or board of directors, with WWE having 5 seats as well. We went over the comments, Vince McMahon and Ari Emanuel speaking publicly on CNBC, but sort of your big picture thoughts and reaction, Way, since we spoke with you on Sunday night.
I think the biggest thing for me is just maybe more of the acceptance that Vince McMahon is back, and he's back in a big way, even arguably maybe in some ways in terms of like his mainstream sort of power now, maybe bigger than it's ever been. The fact that he appeared on CNBC this morning showing his face tells you that he doesn't feel like there's anything to hide anymore. He can be as public as he wants and, say that he's lived up to his mistakes or accepted his mistakes or whatever he said. And then he's moved on, and it just seems like it's business as usual.
And he has gotten through the biggest challenge that was going to be this sale, and the idea of, would a buyer want to be in business with a Vince McMahon? Ari Emanuel clearly wanted Vince to be part of this and would not let him walk away. So you are through that hurdle. Of course, Brandon brought it up, and it's worth mentioning that when we're seeing the filings back at the beginning of the year, and Vince, forcing himself back into the company, and the WWE board of directors stating in their letter that, they had reason to believe that there are things that are not public yet that would certainly put off some warning signs. I think the last thing you would want would be any potential issues that come with this, as the sale is still not finalized. It still has to be approved at the requisite levels of government, but they're expecting it to close by the end of this year. But nonetheless, Vince McMahon, he is very much back in the thick of things, and he was Fightful reporting that he was at Raw tonight, and he was at least in Gorilla for the opening segment, if not longer. But they had only noted the beginning of the show that he was there. But, we got his explanation when asked about the creative involvement, that he is sort of going to be your big picture guy that is going to be overseeing things, but he will not be, quote, in the weeds, which for those with a good memory, it instantly brought you back to the exact phrasing he used when Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff were hired as executive directors, that Vince would have a overarching view of the creative, but would not be in the weeds. And we know how in the weeds turned out to be back in 2019. And even looking at a big picture direction like that's going to have an enormous influence if the big direction is ultimately Vince's call, which that's the setup that it is going to be. Time will tell. But you could certainly watch this show, and you're watching it, and suddenly is Bad Bunny at a hospital? No, he's at a local medical facility. And you're just, all these little things that you're just going to pay closer attention to now. But I don't think anyone is looking at this as though it's some guarded state secret that Vince McMahon is going to have a hand in directions, and maybe he will at times get into the minutia. I mean, I don't think anyone should be surprised by that. Exactly, right into the weeds and yanking out stuff. And we'll get to it later as well with like Fightful's report, like several changes to the show coming as well from the afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just maybe the course of, activity that's taken place from January until now, this feels like it's a pretty logical progression. But just to kind of think back to where we were at the end of, January, at the start of this year, thinking that he was out of this business, or at the very least, out as, the day to day, to now, I think you just have to look at it as just like a real power play that he managed to pull off, to get himself back in through all these various steps, and look at it today, face on TV and in celebration. So
listen, I've said this before, like you can have whatever opinion you have of Vince McMahon. He navigated this masterfully, from the understanding the power he held as the controlling shareholder to force his way back into the company. Now, one of the biggest obstacles he would have had was to force himself in, and the stock tanks. And he had the protective cover of coming and knowing that what is going to overcome any backlash towards me, it's the promise of the gold at the other side of the rainbow, that being a sale. And when he came in, the stock did not go down. It went up because of this clear directive, this clear path that I'm here to navigate a sale. And and Wall Street welcomed him back. And that was the only penance he had to worry about. And from there, he navigated himself back into the company. And now it becomes a very interesting question that, at least publicly, the stance was he is back here to facilitate the sale of a company. Now that those strategic alternatives have been revealed, now what does his job look like? What is the task when there's not a company to be sold? You are, in theory, the number two in this brand new company. There will be no shortage of things that are needed, but what does your day-to-day look like?
I mean, judging by this interview, Ari Emanuel personally asked him to stay. And that probably, is all the justification he needs. Hey, I was going to leave. This was all I was going to do. But my boss now wants me to be here because he thinks that I'm the only person, I'm the best person for the job, whatever they have to say to justify it, and that's all he needs. And he's back.
The big things to look at when the company goes public is obviously what the appetite is for this public offering and what kind of value is assigned to this new company that is going to have to leverage this debt that is being assigned from it from day one from Endeavor. The other questions are the health of live sports rights. Ari Emanuel, Nick Khan, they are very bullish on UFC rights, on WWE rights, and they have to be. That is the lifeblood. When you look at the breakdown that they put out of UFC revenues and WWE revenues, you're looking at about 75, 73% respectively for these companies that are taking in their last year's revenues from media rights. And you have some major deals that are coming their way in the next couple of years. In the imminent future are the Raw and SmackDown rights, that the right of first refusals were going to be accepted this week from the incumbents. And then you have the UFC rights that are not all that far down the road in 2025 when they are up with ESPN. And one of the more interesting articles that came out today was an interview with Nick Khan on Axios that went into several topics. And it included the idea that, yes, the television deals will be separate, but the idea of a combined streaming deal with the UFC and WWE is something that could be on the table. And when you're looking at it, here are industries that can become very attractive to an Endeavor. Here are these companies. They are live events and is something that they want to exploit, that are rich in intellectual property that they own completely. They do not have unions or associations, and therefore the talent costs can be kept at a ceiling. We know what it is for UFC. We don't know what the percentage is in WWE, but we know it's not an astronomical percentage. So you have that ability to control your costs, and at the same time, this is 52 a week year programming with an audience that will also buy not just live tickets, they will buy your big shows. Pro wrestling, or at least WWE, it would certainly be an experiment to try and go back to any of that. But for your biggest shows, like this is an audience that for many of them, they grew up with the idea that the big show, we pay for that. And I always say that it's not something that your average sports fan was conditioned to, that the big game, the finals, you're getting that on television. You're not conditioned to pay $30 for the Super Bowl. You are conditioned to pay a lot of money for the big UFC card. And if you had to pay for WrestleMania, I think when push came to shove, you would.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think once they lay everything out, it makes perfect sense why the people who found so much success monetizing the UFC to, its greatest levels that it's ever seen will feel the same confidence in being able to grow the WWE in much the same way. And by combining the two of them and somehow, maybe amplifying the potential of the both of those, vehicles, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. So I think when it goes public, I have to imagine it's a pretty attractive looking, combined company.
It becomes interesting of how an ESPN figures into this. Like ESPN has been a huge reason. It's UFC has done a lot for ESPN, but ESPN has done a lot for UFC. And we do see for the big events, such as like this past weekend, like they sent a crew out there with Daniel Cormier and company, and ESPN was putting a big spotlight on WWE. And you get WWE ingrained in that kind of ESPN coverage. That's a big win for WWE. And again, that's just one of many suitors, but you're looking at these existing relationships, and I just think you do have a lot of parallels between these two companies when it comes to overseas events, looking for big events that you can have site fees for, that both companies are exploring and are going to continue to. The idea that we sort of saw by accident last July when you had International Fight Week and Money in the Bank both in Las Vegas that weekend, and you ended up somewhat piggybacking off of one another. Maybe you want to avoid those weekends, but maybe there is a time in the year when it makes sense that we could do a Friday, Saturday, Sunday combo of some sort.
Merchandising, John, t-shirt stores, action figures, like if you're making UFC figures, you can draw a deal to, make a WWE doll. If you're printing WWE shirts, well, you can use the same factory to print a UFC shirt, everything, like I mean, I'm a huge Lego fan. Of course, I follow like that company pretty closely. I look at this as almost like their ability to brand, Technic to an older, more mature audience, and the regular Lego to, little kids like me, and then Duplo for babies. You have something for every single section of the market, but it's all found in the same store.
Also, it's the notion that whenever you see big companies like this come together, it is, today it's all, popping champagne bottles and congratulations, and everyone's putting on a happy face, but there will come a day when, there is the inverse of all that celebratory mood when these companies come together. And we all lived through it and covered with the UFC and what went through I don't want to say a gutting of that company, but there were key people that were gone. Like their Canadian office was totally disrupted. There were people there that had been there, forever and were let go. And that's what happens when, okay, we have this talent relations department and this talent relations department. Well, we don't need two. And when you're taking on such a significant purchase here, like this is all about growing revenue and slimming down costs. And that will be an ongoing struggle. And there will be, unfortunately, like employee casualties with a purchase like this.
I mean, synergy is one of the big words that they've been touting with this deal. And what does synergy mean? The ability to combine the forces. And when you're combining forces, it means a lot of people are with the similar job as, the other person are going to be out of work. That's just economical sense. That's going to be unfortunate and probably within these slides, not something you'll see completely touted, but that is the exact attraction of combining these teams. So it's going to be sad, yeah, for a lot of people, I'm sure.
Nick Khan was asked about potential layoffs, and he said they were unsure and that an integration team is going to be put into place between both companies in short order, and we'll have a lot more in the next week or two. Then he was also asked about the deal that WWE has with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And this is a 10-year relationship that began in 2018. So still several years left on this deal that Endeavor is inheriting with this, and what represents a large amount of revenue per year.
Right. And again, the history between Ari Emanuel and Endeavor with the Saudis is a little bit complex.
Yes, in the fallout of the Jamal Khashoggi murder in October of 2018, there was investment from the government of Saudi Arabia in Endeavor that Ari Emanuel essentially stopped after the Khashoggi murder, and it really went out and put his feelings towards that in a way that this was sizable revenue that was going to be put into Endeavor. And it has been profiled in the years since that he was very concerned about just personal safety and such. But we are also years removed from that, and it sounds very callous. But with time, when there's large amounts of money to be made, people will contort and learn ways to work with problematic areas when there is a financial benefit. Like, that's just the reality. And once you're removed, like, it's unfortunate, but like Jamal Khashoggi, it's not as sensitive an issue as it was in 2018, 2019. You're several years removed. And when you're looking at the WWE taking in the neighborhood of $100 million a year, again, every $1 million is appreciated when you're going through a purchase like this. And to say no to that, it's very easy for an Ari Emanuel to just say, listen, I have a fiduciary duty to my shareholders to not turn that money down, and I have to put my moral compass to the side. That is his job.
I completely agree with you. Absolutely. I mean, it might have been a moral decision at the time, but it was also, I'm sure, very much a PR decision. And the stakes in terms of PR for working with Saudi Arabia are probably not as going to be covered as much now. So to add beyond that, if they do continue to, keep this deal going, do they go one step further? And can the UFC start doing shows in Saudi Arabia? Because what's the holdup there then?
You would have no doubt that Saudi Arabia would love to have UFC fights in the country. Just the fact of the success that they have had with boxing, and quite frankly, a big UFC fight would be bigger than a big WWE show in Saudi Arabia. But Nick Khan stated that our relationship with the kingdom is a terrific partnership for which we're appreciative of, and nothing in terms of anyone else's prior experience will affect that. We think that we've delivered the product in the way that the kingdom wanted it delivered. We have a multiple-year agreement with them in place. We're excited to do a show. We'll be back there May 27th for a big premium live event. So getting in a plug there as well on a sensitive issue. Dana White gave a quote that this company has been on fire for the last 7 years, and now that we will be adding WWE to the portfolio, I am excited to take this to another level. Vince is a savage in the wrestling space. Ari is a beast at what he does. And then add what we at UFC bring to the table, and there is no limit to what this company can accomplish in the next 5 years.
A savage and a beast. This thing looks like a Dungeons and Dragons here. Sure, whatever. Yeah, I mean,
I'd love to sit in on this meeting. The first, the get to know you dinner.
Can you imagine the small talk among this group? Oh man, I don't know. So if we're looking at this chain of command, it's Vince up top here of this new company that's yet to be named, and then underneath will be Dana White and Nick Khan, who are sort of the two, at least entitled presidents of their respective brands. Although it sounded like from the CNBC interview that, I mean, Dana, like Ari specifically said, Vince will have WWE and Dana will have UFC. Do you anticipate Vince having much involvement with the UFC side of things at all?
I don't. I can't say that there will be some, naturally you want crossover and strategic decisions to have that kind of synergy. So that would exist. But the idea of
he's not booking fights.
Exactly. Like as Ari said, like they understand, like we are here to essentially be the engine of these companies. And that is how we have worked with it. We are not getting into the boardroom and booking fights. Like they run the fight business. We're running the business end. And I think that's what's going to exist. That is not Vince McMahon's world. Will he be leaned on? Will he have input? I mean, it would be natural that there would be more of that, but I don't foresee a situation where it would be like Vince dictating UFC business.
Except unless like with TV deals and maybe things like that, even streaming deals. I imagine Vince would have quite the voice when it comes to things.
Well,
like
again, all of this, you bring up that those are a lot of powerful figures on that spreadsheet. And when you are looking at just these domestic rights deals for WWE, Is Nick Khan spearheading this? Like, he has been the one doing all the legwork in the years up to this. But is Ari Emanuel now taking more of a leadership position in seeking out those television deals? Like, on paper, like, this looks like your NHL team where you just went out and got all the highest priced free agents. And anyone who has seen big time, like, budget sports teams, you can get all the key players together, but is there going to be that cohesiveness among people that are very much leaders in their positions? And now there might be you're going to have to defer some of that power as well. Like, you can look at a Nick Khan and an Ari Emanuel, and that's a dream team to be going out and selling your media rights. But who is the one that is the leader, that the head of Fox's programming is?
Will they get along? Can they get along?
Can they coexist? The story of Nuco. Maybe they should just go with Nuco. Just stay with it.
Nuco. That doesn't really. Maybe I mean, Alpha's taken. He's had Titan in the past. You know what kind of,
well, you don't think he'd go with Omega Entertainment, would you?
In the wrestling space, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe not.
Tuesday, Brandon and I will be back again, and we're going to be joined by CNBC media reporter, the man who broke this story, Alex Sherman, will be on with us live at noon Eastern on the Post Wrestling YouTube channel. So if you want to hear that interview, we will be live at noon Eastern, and then it will be available after the fact, both on the YouTube channels for WrestleNomics and Post Wrestling and our respective audio feeds. So looking forward to talking to Alex Sherman, who has been covering this story for a long time and was the one to report that the deal was imminent on Sunday, and get everyone bracing for the big sale to be announced early Monday morning. Nothing like a 6:57 a.m. email alert that the company has been sold.